External L3OUT with OSPF. Okay, everyone, so we just finished doing L3OUT in BGP. So we use BGP as our routing protocol to establish adjacency between the ACI fabric and the Site 1 location. So we had an environment in which we had Site 1. It was dual home to Leaf 1 and Leaf 2 using a VPC. And we peer BGP in that way. So we peer BGP with Leaf 1 and Leaf 2. Now, in this scenario, we're going to peer OSPF to border leaf 102 to site number 2. So we have from the ACI side, I am actually marking border leaf 102. So border leaf 102 has an interface connected on port 135 going to a provider, and this is a service provider router, or in this case, your customer edge router. From there, you have a layer 2 circuit. This will be either a VPLS service or Metro Ethernet, etc. So you're going to have a dedicated layer 2 circuit going to this site number 2, in which you have a local layer 3 core doing all the local routing functions. But then we need to establish connectivity using OSPF and perform neighborship adjacency between Leaf 102 and Site 2 and 9K. So we need to do the following items. So we need to configure that interface profile. So we gotta configure the interface profile for Ethernet 135, and this interface profile will be attached to the external L3OUT domain. So this will be the routed domain. And finally, we're going to use that external routed domain and attach to the L3OUT in the tenant that we previously configured called external clients. So what we're going to do now, we're going to first establish that physical connectivity. You know the process, build the policy group for the interface. In the policy group, you add CDP, you enable, if you want to enable CDP, you want to enable the speed, hardcode the speed, you can do it there. Once you have the policy group, you go ahead and configure the interface profile, enable the interface to be Ethernet 135. So we want to enable Ethernet 135 and Leaf 102. Okay, so we're going to use this interface to connect to site number 2. And once we're done with the physical connectivity, we then will peer OSPF. Let me clean this real quick. So the end goal for us is to have Leaf 102. And we know that we are seeing here a provider router. Don't even care about it. Think of it, it's just a layer 2 link. So we're connecting from the border leaf all the way to site 2, which has been extended with a service provider, right? So from Leaf 102, we're going to connect to a 9K running NXOS mode. So we're not running ACI in this site. So basically it's an NXOX 9K mode. And what we want to do is we want to bring OSPF and we want to build a point-to-point adjacency between those two networks. So this will be Site 2 and this will be my data center. So once we have that Site 2 established, then Site 2 can reach resources in ACI. So let's go ahead and do the configuration. I'm going to begin by doing the physical connectivity. I'm going to enable that interface Ethernet 135. And once I am done with the fabric access policies, then I will use those objects and then build my layer 3 out in the tenant for external connectivity. Okay, so I'm here in my APIC. So first thing, we're going to build that physical connection. We're going to enable port 35 and Leaf 102 and build the proper objects. So then we can move into the tenant piece, okay? So let's start by doing the policy group. And if you remember, we did already for Site 1. Here it is. So we got to do a new one. And in this case, remember Site 1? It was a VPC type because we were connecting Leaf 101 and Leaf 102 to Site 1. But in this case, we only have a single leaf. So it's going to be Leaf 102. And the way we want to do that is by making an access port policy group, meaning that it's a single port. We're not going to do any port channel on it, okay? Select access port policy. Let's label it the same way, but for Site 2, site underscore site 2. and then policy group. And the link is 1 gig. We want to enable CDP, and that's about it. We'll press submit. So now we have that policy group built. Let's build the profile. Okay, so let's go to Leaf Profiles, create Leaf Interface Profile, name, and we'll label this site. And let's take a look first and see what the name of site 1 is. So we want to follow the same convention, right? Okay, so site 2 underscore int underscore profile. Okay, and then we finally select Leaf 102, Ethernet 135. Ethernet 135, and then we assign the policy group that we previously configured. So it will be site 2 policy group, and we'll press OK and submit. Let's go ahead and build the AEP. So we already did an AEP for site 1, and in this case, we need to build also a external router outside. So that will be your external domain that will be attached to the L3OUT in the tenant. Okay, so let's first build the AEP. Right click, create. Okay, let me go ahead and do it. Okay, so we got site 2 AEP. Now that we build that L3OUT, we can attach it to the particular profile. So we go here, next, and finish. Okay, so now we have that new AEP. It's time to attach the AEP to the policy group. So we'll go back into the policy group. We have it here. Scroll all the way down, and then find the attached entity profile, attach it here, press submit, and already it's telling us this is the interface that we configure in the interface profile. Submit, and that should take care of all the objects. Finally, we need to enable that interface. We go to the switch policies, profiles, Leaf profiles, and it will be Leaf 102. And we just need to attach the object, and we should be good to go. And let's find it real quick, submit, and we are done on the fabric access policy. So everything from a communication standpoint should be good. Now we can use that external domain that we just configured to attach to our L3OUT in the tenant for external sites. So it will be external sites, okay? Networking, we're going to expand networking, external router networks, and we already see here site 1. That previous video we did site 1. Now we're going to do the same thing for site 2. The difference is we're not doing BGP, we are doing OSPF. So let's create external router outside. In this case will be site 2, and we definitely need a VRF. So we created a VRF for site 1, we need another one for site 2. You can combine them on one VRF, but if you want to make everything more segmented, you should have a separate VRF, okay? And in this case, let's call this site 2 VRF. We're not going to modify OSPF timers. We should just leave everything as it is. We'll press OK. And now the external router domain, this is where we attach that fabric access policy into this particular router outside or L3OUT. So here it is. And finally, we turn on OSPF, right? So we want to turn on OSPF in site 2. And you have a couple of options to do not so stubby areas, redistribute LSAs. In this case, we're just doing a traditional. We'll just want to do a regular area, and then we are just enabling the backbone. So it will be a 0. And that's about it, right? So I want to show you now that once we build this initial L3OUT, we can go inside the L3OUT and configure individual settings. So we can go next here. And let's just click finish. So now we have site 2, but now we attach the node. In this case will be the leaf that is part of this site 2, which is Leaf 102. Right click here, create node, and then this will be Leaf 102. And we want to assign the Leaf 102 here and the router ID. My router ID based on the diagram is, let me bring the diagram back. So you can see here that it's going to be 10 20 20 200. So that will be my router ID. So let's go ahead and configure that. Okay, so I am going to configure that real quick here. 10 20 20 200, and we'll press OK. Now we want to attach the OSPF interface profile, and this is where we attach the physical interface and assign the layer 3 IP, so we can then communicate to site 2. So we can do that connectivity and peer in OSPF. So we want to assign that layer 3 interface right here. So click the plus sign, and we can call this site 2 OSPF. and we'll press next. We're not going to do any authentication in the OSPF process. We'll press next. And here, instead of us selecting an SVI as we previously did on the last video with BGP, we're just going to do a physical layer 3 interface, which will be a router interface, okay? You also have the options to create sub interfaces. So if you have a trunk and then you can tag a VLAN and create a sub interface, you can do that. That's not a problem. But in this case, we're just going to do a router interface, okay? Plus sign. And now I have to select my node, which is leaf 102, and find my port 35. And now we want to assign that address from the leaf 102 side. So let me find what the address is based on the diagram. Okay, so based on the diagram, my address will be 172.16.20.2. And on the other side, it's going to be .1. I should add the side annotation, but it's a /30, so it's only 2 IPs. One is going to be on side 2 side, and then 2 will be on the border leaf in ACI. Okay, so we're going to configure this address right now. Okay, so it's going to be 172.16.20.2/30. Okay, very important. You know, OSPF requires to have a MTUs they need to match on both ends. You have the option in ACI, and I will show you in a bit, of ignoring the MTU, but I will suggest you make sure that you have this completely end-to-end configured, you know, equally, so you don't run into any issues. Okay, so I'm just going to assign the 1500 value on it, and then we're going to press OK, and we're OK here, and we are done with the interface profile. So we'll press submit. Now what we need to do is configure the associated OSPF interface policy name. Okay, so we configure the node profile in which we attach the leaf 102, we assign the router ID, and we then did the interface profile, which in this case we assigned the router interface to be the port 35 and leaf 102, and we assigned the IP. We now need to select the type of OSPF interface that we want to configure this particular object into. So I want to do a point-to-point OSPF. So the way that I'm going to select this to be a point-to-point link, and from an OSPF standpoint, is by creating a policy here. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick policy, and it's going to be site 2 OSPF policy. Okay, and I have the option to do OSPF using broadcast, or I can do a point-to-point or unspecified. I am going to select point-to-point. I want to do a point-to-point between site 2 and ACI. So select point-to-point, and I got a couple of options here. I can ignore, like I mentioned to you, you can ignore the MTU and still communicate, but I would not suggest you do that. You should definitely set the values and make sure that everything is consistent across the board, okay? And you can then advertise the subnet from the particular parameter. I usually assign it, and then I advertise that particular subnet, but then I can also advertise other prefixes as I add them into the OSPF process, okay? We'll press submit, and finally we'll click submit here, and we are done on the interface profile, okay? Now, one last thing that you want to do is you want to enable the actual connectivity to this particular site 2 tenant, and on the network side, we mentioned previously, this is where you advertise your subnets, and this is where you allow traffic in and out. This is where you attach contracts to allow external connectivity to reach the ACI fabric, okay? So let me right click and create the external network, and we can call this site 2 subnet. And in here, I can either specify what I am going to allow to communicate into ACI, or I can just allow all of it. I would definitely be specific about it. Let's take a look at the diagram, and I'm going to see what the subnet in site 2 is, so then we can specify that particular one here, okay? Let's take a look at that. So my remote site 2 subnet is going to be 10.200.20/24. So let's go ahead and select that to be the network in the network portion. So we're going to assign the subnet as part of the external networks, okay? Okay, so let me go ahead real quick here. 10.2.200.0/24. And we want to do external subnets for the external IPG, meaning that this is what I know from site 2, right? So we can assign what it's allowed to communicate from site 2 inbound into the ACI fabric. In our next video, we're gonna discuss the other options, which is when we send routes into the Site 2 location, right? So we have our own networks, we want to redistribute them into Site 2. This is where we do that. Or if we have another external network that we want to import the routes inbound onto ACI, this is the options that we are going to choose here. Okay, so for now, let's just build OSPF and then we'll discuss this on our next video. We'll press OK and we click submit. Cool. So now we have everything. Let's make sure that everything is correctly configured. Router domain, VRF site to VRF, node profile, the node is there, the network is specified. Okay, now let me bring the console, and I already have the console going to that Site 2 core switch. So I already configured that interface that faces the circuit. It's Ethernet 1.1. So let's show run interface Ethernet 1.1. So you can see here 172.16.21, the ACI side is .2. So the first thing that you will definitely do to make sure that this is communicating is ping it, right? 172.16.20.2. And let's wait. There you go. Now we know that we are able to reach the ACI fabric from Site 2. We now know that OSPF is configured in ACI. We need to do the same thing in Site 2 because Site 2 is a completely new site. So let me go ahead real quick and configure OSPF. I'm going to do it very simple. I'm going to enable the feature. And then I am going to run the process first. Router OSPF1, router ID. We want to use the interface facing the ACI fabric, which in this case is the circuit. And now we can go into the interface 1.1 and then IP router OSPF1 area 0. And we already see some activity. And finally, because we configure our object to be a point-to-point interface profile, we need to assign the same thing here. So then it gets established, or else it's not going to full state. It's not going to start exchanging routes, okay? So let me go ahead and do it real quick. And I turned on the debug so you can see what's going on the back end. So let me go ahead and fix the OSPF neighbor to be point-to-point. And we should see some activity going on. There you go. We definitely have a full state. We've went into full adjacency. So show IP OSPF neighbors. And there you have it. What's my neighbor ID? It's my router ID for leaf 102. Remember, 10, 20, 20, 200. Let me see the routes, and we should see that also as an advertised OSPF route. And sure enough, OSPF1, this is the router ID for leaf 102. Let me go ahead and ping it. There you have it. So you see, OSPF is very straightforward in ACI as long as you know the correct order of operations. You make sure that you have all the objects configured properly or your fabric access policies configured, and you should be good to go. OSPF is very, very straightforward to do in ACI as long as you know the order of operation. It's very important for you to understand how everything connects together in ACI, how everything relates to everything. So there might be a single object that you forgot, and it's dependent upon the whole thing. So make sure that you follow the steps. And again, like I tell everyone, practice makes perfection. You should continue practicing until you dominate this to a very comfortable level. Okay? Alrighty, so let's get a wrap up with this video. Our next video, we're going to do some very interesting stuff. I'm going to allow connectivity from Site 1 to Site 2, but using the ACI fabric as my route hop. So I'm going to connect to Site 1 from Site 2, and vice versa, but also I'm going to allow access from Site 1 to my other tenants in ACI so they can communicate onto the server side. So it's going to be a very fun, exciting video, okay? Alrighty, so let's continue. Okay, everyone, in our next video, we're taking a look at tenants to L3OUT Part 1. Thank you for watching.